Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce the distinguished speaker of today, Professor Prof.S.N.Balagangadhara. He is a professor at the Ghent University in Belgium and director of the Indian Platform and the Research Center, working in the Kulturwissenschaft. His doctoral thesis was entitled Comparative Science of Cultures and the Universality of Religion, an essay on worlds without views and views without world. Professor Balu has been researching the nature of religion. His central area of inquiry has been the study of Western culture against the background of Indian culture. His research program is called in Dutch Verklinkende Kulturwissenschaft, which translates into Comparative Science of Culture. Professor Balagangadhara has held the co-chair of the Hinduism unit at the American Academy of Religion. He also gives, within bracket, misunderstanding of Indian culture and the search for happiness. In his first work, The Heathen in His Blindness, Balagangadhara focuses on religion, culture and cultural difference. He is mainly known for the controversial claim that religion is not a cultural universal. According to the author, Christianity had a profound influence on Western culture, and Balagangadhara argued that the analytical tools with which the West has understood other cultures like India are therefore intrinsically shaped by Semitic and Christian theology. The Semitic doctrine that God gave religion to humankind, Balagangadhara argued, lies at the heart of the ethnographic belief in the universality of religion. Balagangadhara proposes therefore a novel analysis of religion, the Roman Religo, the construction of religions in India and the nature of cultural differences. His second major work, Reconceptualizing Indian Studies, appeared in 2012 and argues that post-colonial studies and modern Indian studies are the need of regeneration. Stressing the need for an alternative understanding of Western culture, Balagangadhara argues that Hinduism, caste system and secularism are not colonial constructs but entities within the Western cultural experience. He argues that the so-called facts about India and her traditions are a result of colonial consciousness. Balagangadhara claimed that he was, within quotes, a run-of-the-mill progressive since he was transformed from an orthodox background into a fire-breathing atheist. However, he said that, again quotes, the revolution could not come soon enough for me. However, what brought me to Marxism also brought me out of it. The inability of these stories to make sense of my experience. I had dimly begun to realize that I was an Indian and that I lived as such in a culture I hardly understood. At last, I could begin to access my own cultural experiences in the way they needed to be assessed. However, the job is not complete and the process not yet over. During all these years, I have been constructing the tools required to gain access to our experiences because I realized too that my individual biography was but the Indian history writ small, unquote. Professor Balagangadhara was the co-chair of the Hinduism unit at the American Academy of Religion from 2004 to 2007. On 1st October 2003, University of Pardubice, Czech Republic, awarded him with its honorary doctorate, Doctor Honoris Causa, and gold medal for the outstanding development of the comparative science of cultures and religions, the development of collaborations between European and Indian universities, and his contribution to the development of the studies of religion at the Faculty of Arts and Philosophy at University of Pardubice. On 7th July 2014, Professor Balagangadhara announces he attained enlightenment. He dates the event to June 2014 and suggests that enlightenment, within quotes, is basically human happiness. He is currently developing a set of hypotheses that will allow us to understand enlightenment in a 21st century conceptual language. The followers of Professor Balagangadhara use social media to communicate his teachings about happiness and developmental philosophy. Indian traditions can infuse human minds and bodies all over the world with the experiential knowledge that follows from a genuine search for enlightenment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Adappa Satnarayan. May I please request Professor Balagangadhara to deliver the Maulana Azad Memorial Lecture.
Good evening. How much time do I have, Mr. Chairman, sir? 45 minutes? 1 hour? Okay. Perhaps my talk requires a kind of a context. The context is nearly 40 years of research, which began as a search for social change and revolution. At the age of 17 and a half, I left home. Over a period of time, grew into a fire-breathing Marxist. Professional revolutionaries, as we used to call ourselves those days. And had faced huge problems after some time. And I thought that it has something to do with the philosophical foundations of Marxism itself. So I went to Europe nearly 40 years ago, started going deeper into German philosophy. I very soon discovered that there were more problems than I realized. And then began to realize something stranger still. When I went to Europe, I was actually a student of natural sciences. And as you can hear, I speak English reasonably well. I knew more about working class movement and European history than I did about Indian history. But I discovered that actually I didn't know Europe at all. Or, let's put it this way, what I knew about Europe is what the public relations department has told us so far. So trying to understand Europe and trying to understand myself to figure out what exactly was the problem that I was confronting in intuitively understanding Europeans, I discovered two strange things. My first discovery was, never being a nationalist, of course I never read such material before, which is that writings of missionaries and merchants and so on, nearly 400 years of writing. I discovered the descriptions they gave of India was not the India I lived in, or I had lived in. That could, for all I know, be describing Mars. But then it struck me too later that what those people wrote about us in India is actually standard textbook trivia. That's what we teach students in a classroom. In other words, I realized two things. One, I did not know Europe. Strangely, I did not know India either. And then I discovered it's not a psychological individual problem of me. Man actually reflects the great tragedy of all Indian intellectuals. So the last 35 years I've been doing research to understand what exactly took place and to conceptually figure out ways of way out of the problems we're in. And it's taken me to several domains: law, psychology, politics, and so on, including history. So what I'm going to tell you today is a result of my research, of course. And as you understand, see the subtitle, it's a challenge, which means I'm going to provoke you. I have a very, very bad name. I'm not a polite man, it appears, when I speak, which means my provocations will be, hopefully, quite strong as well. And let me first formulate my thesis before I go and elaborate it in the short time that I have. What historians do, whether in India or abroad, but it's basically directed to the Indian historians, is they collect factoids. And the hypotheses they give to explain factoids are the most garden variety, third-rate psychology, sociology, economic hypotheses. There is no such thing as historical explanation, unless one means by that some kind of ad hoc hypothesis to talk about the past. But that doesn't make it historical explanation at all. It's simply a word. So historians do not give historical explanations. They're incapable of doing it. They collect factoids. And the kind of history that's being taught, especially in India today, presupposes, for its truth, for its coherence, for its intelligibility, a Christian Protestant understanding of human history. This is my thesis. And I do claim that Indian notion of itihasa is something completely different than simply translated as history. I worked them out reasonably at length in the document you have in your hands. So I shall confine myself to very briefly outlining it in as provocative terms as possible, because as you know, science and scientific discussion require very sharp formulations. Not the postmodernist nonsense that's taught today as history, but scientific accuracy, scientific precision, and scientific clarity. In the story that I'm figured out so far by studying, it's a discourse on the conception of history, or it is meta reflection on what historians do, what they're writing about. Is that, as I see it, there are at least two very clear strands to the notion of history as we use them today. One is a strand which takes off from the Greeks, especially the Greek philosophers, more specifically Plato, where a distinction is made between myth and reason, or what they used to call mythos and logos in Greek. That distinction tried to suggest that what the bards were doing, that storytellers who existed in Greece, who entertained the masses by telling stories, going from marketplace to marketplace, stories about the heroes, about legends and so on. It was counterposed to some kind of reasoning process, especially in Plato. And he said, or he thought, he wrote, that emotions corrupt reason, and Athenians need to be trained as rational creatures. And by Athenians, of course, I meant only not the women, not the slaves, but the free citizens of Greece. But there was an alternative to that. He wanted to abolish, of course, as you know, all the poets, send them to exile, and have a philosopher king rule Athens. Challenging Plato at that moment, there was another tendency, storytellers, who were defending another way of living in Greece. We hardly know much about them today, except as how Plato described them, as skeptics, as cynics, and so on. But actually there were storytellers who told stories to people about themselves, their past. Anyway, this could not survive for reasons I won't go into now. Greek civilization collapsed, partly because of the conflict between these two tendencies in Greek society itself, between the bards on the one side and philosophers on the other. But second strand is more important to us if you go a couple of centuries further. Where had the emergence of Christianity within the Roman Republic. Now there are many things that we don't know, most Indians at least. We think we know Christianity, but we don't. We think we know religion, we don't. We don't because of the fact that one of the biggest problems in India is a fight between so-called Hindutva movement, of fundamentalism of Hindus as against the secularism of Indians. And one of the claims I have put across is that there is no such thing as Hinduism in India. There never was. Or Buddhism for that matter. There are creations, they do exist, to be sure. But they exist in Western universities and the libraries. Not in India, not in Asia. In any case, this religion, Christianity, conceptualizes, or not conceptualizes, presupposes the entity called God, which came from the Jews, who has not only created the cosmos, that's not what makes him into God, but because of the fact that the cosmos represents his will. Cosmos follows his will. And that there is an end state to human being, salvation as it's called, and to reach salvation, they have to follow God's plan. The only reason why we are born on earth, says Judaism, Christianity and Islam, the Semitic religions in short, the only reason we are born on earth is to obey God's will and nothing more than that. We have no other purpose in life. So when you look at human happenings, human events, as an attempt to fulfill or follow God's rules, God's plans, then an accurate study of the past becomes extremely important, because it is that which will allow you, which determines the course of action you're taking into the future. Now, this is a fundamental, absolutely crucial idea of history, and the first person to develop it very coherently in philosophical terms is St. Augustine in A City of God. So he saw Christianity, or the Christian church, which comprises of saints and sinners of all times, whose destination was to reach the city of God, salvation. And therefore, he said, what we need to do is to understand the follies and foibles of humankind in the past, so that we may not be seduced by the devil, who is the king of earth. So the idea, in other words, that there is a pattern to history, which later on took the form of laws, and that accurate understanding of the past is required, is completely and 100% Christian idea. There's nothing scientific about it. There never has been. Those who call it scientific Some time ago, one of my students discovered a beautiful text in France, in French of 17th century. Showed it to me. I loved the text so much, I took it and made some very minor changes, absolutely minor changes. I'll soon tell you what they are, and gave it to top Indologists. And these Indologists looked at it, were very thrilled with that. They said, this is the most beautiful description of the Indian caste system we ever have seen. So where did you get that? I said 17th century, French writer. Who was it? I gave the name. What's the name of the text? I gave the name of the text. And once they were convinced, they wanted to take a look at that text themselves. I added one small sentence. I said, the text I gave you was a description of France of 17th century. I just replaced nobility for Brahmins, kings for Kshatriyas, and so on, including the fifth estate, as it is called, to Panchamas. And they found it a wonderful description of caste system in India. Now, why am I telling you this story? Of course, they don't like me. Since then, they have stopped speaking to me, which is understandable. Why am I telling you this? Is to say that when Europeans came and described this, for example, the caste system, they were not describing India at all. They were describing Europe, using European language, European framework, describing Indian society. Of course there were hierarchies, of course there were groups, they are there everywhere in the world. But this fantastic creature, caste system, was completely created, which of course we all embrace in India after independence. We have enshrined it in a constitution. So in the same way, when they looked at India, they described using their notions, their conceptions, their theories, their words. And they looked at the myths and the legends of the history, of the Puranas and so-called Itihasa literature as disguised history. Of course, they had this debate, the quarrel with the ancients during the Enlightenment period, when they started looking at myths as some kind of disguised story, disguised history of some sort or the other, either embodying human virtues or fantastic political imagination. They looked at it and transformed these into a religious text. Mahabharata, Puranas, and at the same time they are some kind of disguised history. And there was another dimension which you also had in India, what you call religious or spiritual tendency, and they saw that as an expression of religiosity of the Indians. In other words, they looked at Itihasa in two ways, as some kind of religious text on the one side, and as incapability of the Indians to have a sense of history, because as one of the constant criticisms, which some people are trying to disprove nowadays, that Indians have no sense of history. It's one of the most characteristic descriptions of India. Now, why is this important to us? Because itihasa, just look at the word itihasa. Forget etymologies, I'm not going to go into etymology at the moment, it's not of great consequence to us. The word itihasa is translated as does it happen or does it verily happen and so on. Iti is supposed to be thus, which is very true. But when you write in India, Sanskrit language, or even in vernacular languages, we used to, maybe we don't do it anymore, we used to write letters to uncles and aunts, etc., ending with the word iti. Iti. What does it mean? It is a metalinguistic sign which refers back to what went before. Before what? Before the end, before you sign your name. Itihasa is referring back to something else that must be behind it before the story is told. That is itihas. That's what iti means. Not does it happen saying it's referring to a story that's going to come. It is referring back to something that's already been said. That is what iti means in our languages. So how does it really happen in a story, normal or oral storytelling? You say it and start telling a story. So one speaks about as though iti refers to the story that has to come yet. No, it cannot. It can only refer back to something that's already been said. What's been said before Ramayana, what's been said before Mahabharata then? What is the background text or message that itihasa is referring back to? I have a hypothesis. That's the only explanation I can give. It refers back to Adhyatma. Ramayana, Mahabharata are illustrations of Adhyatmic claims. That is why it is itihasa. Does it happen, going back to something about not salvation, because we are not Christians, not even moksha, because that's a vulgarized word anyway, but certain kind of happiness, certain kind of liberation of some type from earthly problems, which is what Adhyatma is all about. Ramayana, Mahabharata illustrated. Using what? It's a story. What do stories do? Especially what does Ramayana, Mahabharata, what do they do? They are disguised as descriptions of the world. They are not descriptions of the world. They talk of a Rama, they talk of they talk of a Bhima. Maybe those guys existed, maybe they didn't. If they did, the function is empirical reference points to understand the story. It has no other function. Absolutely no other function. So Ramayana, Mahabharata are itihasa, tradition, because they're deeply connected to Adhyatma. Split them apart. You will neither understand itihasa, nor will you understand Adhyatma, which is exactly what's happened to the Indian intellectuals of today. We understand neither. To us, Adhyatmic gurus or godmen of India, basically fools, or maybe somebody like Sri Ravi Shankar who makes a lot of money. Absolute contempt, because we don't understand it. And absolute contempt also for Ramayana, Mahabharata, because of the simple reason, either we try to historicize it, like the BJP people are doing, killing the Indian past that way, or the secularists are going, making fools of themselves, which they always do in any case. But itihasa is neither one nor the other. It is not history in the sense in which the notion of history has been used. So to understand Ramayana, Mahabharata, you need to understand Adhyatma. To understand Adhyatma, you need illustrations. And that's what Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas do. It is a story disguised as a description of the world. Why stories, you ask? I can't go into that now. But stories are the most excellent units of learning in a culture like India. Stories is how we learn. That's why we don't have ethical tracts. We don't have moral theories, which is what West has. From here to the moon and back, there are so many more thick books and theories on moral philosophy. We don't have. We don't have them because our morality is taught to us through stories. And that's why there are no moral rules in India, or in Asia anyway for that matter, which is why the West called us immoral people, because they discovered no moral rules in Indian society. No ethical commandments. In our local languages, we cannot formulate a statement that says you ought not to kill. In the moral ought, we cannot say it in any of the Indian languages. How could you not speak? How can you not say in your own language you ought not to and still carry on doing ethics? You cannot. That is a peculiarity not just of India, whole of Asian culture. We have no moral notions. Does not mean we are unethical. We are deeply ethical as anybody else. But we don't have the kind of morality, the moral theories that Jews, Christians and Muslims have. That's why we need stories. That is how we learn. That's why such a huge storehouse of stories in Indian culture, because that's how we are taught. So in that sense, Ramayana, Mahabharata, that's why they live on as stories, because they teach us. And they don't teach us about how to live in the world, but how to access Adhyatmic experience. That's what they're teaching us. So Itihasa then combines these two, is related to Adhyatma, and Europeans split it apart because in their culture such unity didn't exist. Today, intellectuals and historians continue this division without even understanding it. I'm yet to come across a serious discussion by an Indian historian on what Itihasa means, and iti as a metalinguistic word, which exists in Sanskrit, as disquotational marks do. What we call scare quotes. When I say London is a 6-letter word, I'm talking about the word London. I indicate it by putting quotes. London is a 6-letter word. That is, I'm mentioning the city. London is a big city. There are no quotes. I'm using the word London. This distinction, which was made 100 years ago in Western philosophy, was made more than 2,500 years ago in Sanskrit. And we didn't use disquotational marks. We used the word iti, referring back to what has been said, introducing the distinction between use and mention. This is the fundamental idea of Itihasa. This is not the story of whether some king existed in Ayodhya, whether Rama lived in Ayodhya and so on. It's not a discussion about that. But maybe they did live a king called Rama. Maybe there was a city called Ayodhya. Maybe it's the same that they have today. Maybe not. But the point is, that's not why Ramayana is written, and that's why not why Ramayana lives on. It's the only way we can access Adhyatmic truths. This, if you like, this unity was broken because another culture from another part of the world used a framework, used a set of concepts that were alien to us but natural to them. So the mistake we make today is, that's all right. And the mistake we make today is to continue to think that this division, which is itself derivative of certain philosophical assumptions, which in their turn rest on Christian understanding of the world, is somehow scientific, because it's not. You have no way of showing that. But you can show the opposite. You can show that it's not scientific. So in that sense, today, the second challenge to Indian historians is to begin to understand much more differently, or not just much more, totally differently, the role of texts, if you want to call them texts, Ramayana, Mahabharatas and Puranas. Not to do what Sangh Parivar is doing, that's namely transform them into historical figures. But if you do that, just think of it. We're already experiencing it. Suddenly the Dalits will stand up and say, Vanaras were the name of a tribe, basically Dalits actually, of those days, and they were called Vanaras because the Brahmins did not respect the Dalits. Rakshasas, they are the Dravidians. They were neutral in the war. Rama was Krishna was some upstart somewhere at some place called Mathura. When we start talking like this and this consciousness goes down into the people 2-3 generations from now, there will be nobody who will be a Bhakta of Rama, Bhakta of Hanumanta, and we won't talk about Rama, Lakshmana as brothers, who everybody should emulate, or we don't sit and weep because Ekalavya had to sacrifice his thumb to Drona. it will destroy Indian culture. That's what Sangh Parivar is doing. None of the secularists are any better, they're even worse. But caught between the two, there only one person is paying the price, or one entity is paying the price. That's Indian culture. And that entity will be your children and grandchildren. You will lose your culture once and for all. That's where Indian historians are heading, in both directions. So it appears to me that unless we start trying to understand our own culture in a scientific way, we understand what sciences are better than what we did 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We have 400 years of science, 400 years of history of science, sociology of science, philosophy of science. We understand what sciences are much better. So unless we attempt to develop a scientific understanding of Indian culture, simply sitting and reproducing the latest fashion that comes from Paris or London or California or New York, that's what happens in JNU. Every 6 months they discover a new hero who happens to be a hero in Colombia. And everybody is talking about it. 6 months later comes another hero. Not many heroines are there, except Gayatri Spivak, I suppose, but she's not a heroine anymore. So instead of this kind of mindless aping of fashions of Colombia, of New York, of Paris, of London, it's time that we start thinking very scientifically about ourselves, because we don't understand ourselves. We don't understand our own culture. Every single theory we are going to use to understand ourselves is a reproduction of what Europeans have been saying about us. And what Europeans said is not about us. They were describing their experience of us. That we have taken to be sciences today. They came to India, saw us, they experienced something understandable. And they wrote down their experiences, which is also understandable. But why should you transform their experiences of Indians into fundamental claims about Indians? But that's what we are doing, mindlessly aping the West. And historians are one of the worst criminals in that regard. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, I've been provocative enough. Actually, I'm not so harsh, but today I have deliberately tried to be. So we'll have some fireworks. I was warned for fireworks. So I'm reasonably well clothed, I think. Enough material to stop the bullets. So, Mr. Chairman, sir, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know the real arguments, please read the document. It's 42 pages long. I have reduced it, I summarized it, and got out the most provocative statements, in the hope, not that you get angry with me, in the hope that you start thinking. Because you see, if I am wrong, there's nothing wrong. You can sleep peacefully. Your problem begins not if I am right, even if I'm pointing out in the direction of truth, there's a huge problem. So please think about it. Do not dismiss it as ravings and rantings of a madman. This is the result of very serious scientific research. And please think about it. And thank you.
Thank you, Professor Balagangadhara, for a remarkable and engaging talk. May I request Professor Rajan Gurukkal to please give his comments on the talk.
Esteemed Chairman, ICHR, Professor Balagangadhara, Professor Gopinath, distinguished scholars, friends. Now, as a torrential downpour, his speech is over. Now, when you find a text which is least self-reflexive, it's extremely difficult to have a relationship of cognitive encounter with that. So I am in that kind of a predicament. Now when the whole modernity founded on Newtonian physics when the whole modernity founded on Newtonian physics got fundamentally reconstituted by scientists themselves, the foundation was gone. So all social sciences which had a Newtonian physics at a distance as model, never to be realized at any moment, but still as a goal, always thought that they had a strong foundation. When new science began to talk about uncertainties and also the possibilities of having no finality about anything, the Newtonian kind of logocentric certainty, authority, authenticity, credibility of knowledge got questioned, and uncertainty got theorized. Even then, social sciences have been following the old foundation, and if the whole loss of foundation and also a kind of movement by anti-foundationalists, that was not really troubling us like this. Now, it would have been really challenging had Professor Balagangadhara revealed the fact that there did involve epistemic injustice with regard to kind of imperialist kind of dissemination of science all over the world, and as part of that method of production of knowledge. And if methodology of social sciences as methodology of doing history has some kind of a substratum of imperialism, because the meanings, measures and parameters involved in the making of the very mode of production of knowledge, that was imperialistic. And there really one can experience the relationship of epistemological encounter. I expected that. I have read his first work, Heathen, in that, and also the reconceptualizing. Now at least one would be able to experience this issue, the epistemic turn which is critically taking. Now I do not know why he just dismissed in the initial part saying hermeneutic discussion is not required. Now, what I think the audience really expected from you was discussion of hermeneutic turn with some kind of methodological preoccupation, theoretical preoccupation. I couldn't see that at all. And philosophers, of course, philosophers committed to thinking about culture, thinking about society, never used to discuss things without a clear framework of comprehension of things, and also a defined methodology of producing new knowledge. Now we all felt that Professor Balagangadhara was presenting certain things strikingly fresh, but the whole problem that I felt was it was more or less a presentation of emotional ontology, totally forgetful of the need of epistemological foundation. That was the major problem, rather exasperating me. Now you have historians amongst us spend their time, sometimes 5 decades, 6 decades and so on, and then thinking that they have been just mechanically reproducing the postulates of theology, it's really too much. It's really too much. No, only a scholar who is not at all familiar with the commendable body of literature that historians have produced. You cannot dismiss all these studies. I mean, there could be totally ideographic kind of works, but substantially nomothetic kind of works are there, very seriously well-researched works, and he did not mention any other historian, but I do not know why Professor Romila Thappar's name was unnecessarily drawn in, and I wouldn't find anything there at all rather than some kind of personal displeasure. And I am pretty sure that, with all respect I am saying, Professor Balagangadhara has not read any of the works written by Professor Romila Thappar seriously, and also, reading seriously would also mean that holding source material right in front, and one should have technological competence to access the source material, and then also see the methodology used for culling out signifiers out of the source material. It's not paraphrasing the content of the source material, and I don't think no methodologically trained historian is doing that these days. Historian is not just following what is obvious, what is ostensibly given in the source material. Historian has a methodological strategy to go into the source material and identify signifiers, and then the signified is epistemologically valid. And it's that intellectual status which is bringing in legitimacy to the works that historians are producing. Now, if it is just easy to dismiss the entire work just by saying that it's nothing but a reproduction of theology in different languages, now, it is doing injustice not only to the knowledge produced in this country, but to the whole world, the knowledge produced by the whole mankind. And then, saying that I was drawn to Marx, and then I realized there are fundamental philosophical problems, and then I withdrew. Now, this is the problem with many people. They take Marxism as a religion and then would join that. After some time, they will come out of it. It's not the kind of relationship that historians are doing. Historians would accept Marx as one of the great intellectuals who had raised certain very significant questions relating to society, humanity. He related theoretical issues relating to social processes and human affairs. And you take Marx as an intellectual, that's all. Not Marx as propounder of a religion, and you can get yourself enrolled into it, and then after some realization you can get converted into something else, some other religion. So saying something that as a prolegomena will not justify whatever we want to say after that. And I'm not prolonging, because if I go on discussing various things, I lose my flight. That is the main problem. Now, one important issue that I have in the whole studies made by Professor Balagangadhara is that it is, on the one side, utterly politically disengaging and intellectually shallow. I'm sorry to say this. Intellectually shallow in the sense, I as a student of history have been trained that to take certain things for its intellectual depth. That it's not business of any Tom, Dick and Harry, but you are impressed by a work which has gone deep into certain things, and it's the analytical comprehension part of it that inspires you. It's not an ordinary piece. And then it becomes awe-inspiring. There are awe-inspiring books, but when there is no direct intellectual encounter, no cognitive encounter, pointing out very clearly epistemic deviation. Now you reject an epistemology, replace a counter epistemology. Now then it would be really useful. Now for example, why borrow terms from the Western scholarship? No, we can talk about Mahima Bhatta's Vyakti Vivek. Mahima Bhatta's Vyakti Viveka will do. Now there is Lokam, Vedam, Adhyatma. Mahima Bhatta deals with production of knowledge. And he is not talking about Veda or anything of that kind. By Lokam, he means what Professor Balagangadhara referred to as conventional. It is Vyavaharika in our tradition. It's not, we don't have to depend upon the English word conventional for that. Vyavaharika and Paramarthika. Paramarthika is the truth and Vyavaharika what you see. Look, and Adhyatmam is nothing to do with the kind of the Adhyatma sort of thing. That when people used to think seriously, forget about. I used to say that at a time when religious sentiment was strong and spiritual values held sway over men's minds, the idea of rationality excited repulsion in the minds of the people. That they wouldn't be able to engage with that. But that was condemned in India. There are several texts, several theoretical formulations are there relating to knowledge production. Take Apoha Siddhanta, Spodavada, or the whole treatise of the Dharma Gita. Let it be Buddhist scholar or a Jain scholar, Brahmanical scholar, whoever. If we are interested in the subcontinent and then the language of production of knowledge, and we have umpteen texts, why we have to follow the same formulations, linguistic tropes generated by the West? Now they colonized us, okay. They imposed a kind of epistemology on us, and we strained at the least to run ourselves away from the shackles of the production of knowledge or grammar of production of knowledge. But some people who were really tired of the old formulations, the old in the sense, the formulations ordained by Europe as something universal. No, we are not following the universally ordained meanings, measures and parameters of Europe in writing history. But there is a common rational platform where knowledge is recognized. Now, that is common to all. There is no continental kind of difference, there is no national kind of difference these days. Epistemological parameters are the same. And knowledge is recognized serious, knowledge is recognized valid on the basis of the universally accepted values and passions, logic. So why attach, culture with that? The moment you talk about culture and it becomes emotional ontology, it's very difficult to methodologically access that ontology to find something which has epistemological validity. That's the main problem. Instead, had we taken up the question of history of knowledge production in the country, taken up serious texts which deal with what is shallow kind of knowledge, what is serious knowledge. No, he is perfectly right when he says itihasas are having something embedded, something quite significant in terms of ethical postulates. But we have developed our own techniques of going beyond the text. Kuntakas Panchasandhi will do no structural analysis or textual analysis or intertextuality analysis would be required to go deep into the subtext and then intellectually developed a hypertext and then talk about context intellectually. We have tradition of that. Quite a number of texts are available. Ignoring all these, we are picking up some of them which were referred to by scholars like Anandavardhana, for example. Anandavardhana treated epics as epics. Anandavardhana called Mahabharata just as a story composed by so many, or Ramayana as story, and Vipra will not be following what is apparent in these texts, because they have certain intellectual strategies to go deep into them and then come out with the values involved in that, principles involved in that. I mean, this happened everywhere. Everywhere that is the case. When Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were subjected to study, formalists were not sentimentally attached to a particular culture or the groups. They were interested in the techniques of composition of the stories. They were thinking about the structures relating to that, the uniformities, recurrences, regularities, plots, rhythms and patterns that a fairy tale would be showing. They were trying to understand the relationship across this. That meant analysis. The whole formalist, the whole structuralist. Same thing happened here. Long before Saussure talked about the grammatical kind of syntagmatic structure, Panini had done that. Now, Ashtadhyayi will give you the whole demonstration of a kind of brilliant classification, organization, and so on. Now, perhaps Saussure was not interested in publishing his discourses in the class because he was heavily indebted to Panini, and his students after his death collected the lectures and published them. This kind of exchange always took place, and you have some kind of universality when you think seriously about an object of analysis and result of that. And when an object is analyzed all over the world, starting from the ancient Upanishadic times, then to the Greek Hellenic times, and then all over the world, an object of analysis is first determined whether knowable or not. When once it is decided as knowable, then there is a methodical approach. There is a concept of truth about the whole thing. It's not theologically inclined, or it's not ferreted out from theology. The moment that there is truth, then one just cannot attach oneself with the theology. There is notion of truth, and also there is notion of the veracity or the techniques of confirmation. This is how science is produced. And you don't have the uniform kind of science produced in Europe. If Professor Gangadhara's argument is to be accepted as truth, then there shouldn't have been particle physics, there shouldn't have been thermodynamics. People should have just remained in Newtonian planetary physics alone. Newton was certainly a Christian. But at the same time, he was not just propagating let there be light kind of thing. Let there be light. And then it happened. No, it's not that teleological, biblical, Jewish, Christian teleological thing that the Newtonian Principia was propagating. It was a totally different kind of science. And then
I think we are and don't know
pardon? Okay. Yes.
Like I would like to make some comments, so I would humbly request you to enter to put a stop to your peroration, so that we can make some comments on what the speaker has said.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me conclude. Let me conclude. No.
Please allow him to conclude. Please.
Let me conclude what I just started saying. I just wanted to say that even in Europe, there is no monolithic kind of knowledge production. Knowledge deviated dramatically and fundamentally. It deviated from Newton by the time of Heisenberg or Gell-Mann. You have a totally different kind of science. It's that kind of science which has given more critical consciousness in the world. It is the same kind of critical consciousness that our intellectuals in the past, long before, produced here as well. Pointing out this, I end this. Thank you very much. If people got offended, I am extremely sorry.
Professor Gangadhara for 5 minutes. No, generally...
Just 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes.
1 minute.
No, it won't. Just 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. I won't enter into polemics. No. I would like to hear from you, therefore, just one or two things. Yeah, go. Just give me 2 minutes. All right. It's got a very short response. I'll just clarify some things to the audience, that's all. I won't enter into polemics with him. Just 3 things. 1, when I spoke about my past, I was just giving a context within which this whole research program has come into existence. It's not movement from one religion to another, first. Second, I spoke of Romila Thapa, not because I have something personal against the lady, I don't know her, because I just came back 2 days ago, I was reading the newspaper, she was talking about myths and science, and talking about myths in precisely the form in which I'm criticizing. That's why I spoke of Romila Thapa, no other reason. There's some in the Hindustan Times it came, some statement obviously of Modi, I don't know what statement Modi made, but I read what she wrote. That's the reason why I spoke about Romila Thapa, I have nothing against the lady. The third thing is, the reason why I won't respond to him is very simple. I'm willing to accept I'm very, very shallow and so on, but there's one problem. You see, I'm a philosopher, professional philosopher by training. So if you keep on coming and bullshitting about methodology and epistemology, emotional ontology, without knowing what you're talking about, I would simply have failed this man for 5 years in the first bachelor's. So there's nothing to respond to him. He said nothing.
Thank you. We had a wonderful discussion. Discussion in the sense, one comment and then his answer in just 1 or 2 minutes, because generally this is a memorial lecture program. We are not proposing any debate on that. And if our friends are interested, we can have a debate in the ICHR on what he has said. And we are also inviting your comments on the paper, because the text is in your hands. You can go and reflect leisurely and send your comments to our website, wherein I think you can take 1 month to send your reflections, and then we will refer these comments to the speaker, and his answer will also be given to you in the newsletter. So there is no problem that we are not, because the world is too small in this electronic age, and every moment you can be in contact with the speaker. And I thank him very much, because he was very much interested to come and see us, and he is in Belgium and he has been coming out with a new thing. As Professor Gurukkal said, it is very difficult to understand. In the very beginning itself, I think he had gone above our trained minds. When we take a trained mind, I think we can only think on 1 line or 2 lines. So in one of the meetings along with our speaker, I told and I said about great Gautama, who had brought a new theory and a new, which has later became a worldwide religion. So about him, also in those times, only the scholars could understand something about what he said, and it is also commented on him that he was born at least 1,000 years ahead of his times. Similarly, it is also said about great scholar, philosopher G.2 Krishnamurti Garu. They said he has at least born some 500 years ahead of his times. So there are certain things which by the time we can understand a theory, in the first I think we will have the criticisms, and then by then with these comments and criticisms I think the theory that he has proposed may be refined and then it could be presented to us again. So he has taken a lot of trouble to come over here despite our hesitations to invite him, and we had not provided him any comfortable stay or comfortable travel. Despite of that, he had said only one word, that you don't worry about me and my comforts and my travel. I will take care of everything, and I can only come, I will definitely come and speak to you for half an hour. That's okay. We are very much thankful to you, sir. In spite of that, what we can do, we will definitely do, and I think our member secretary has prepared for that, and ICHR is really indebted to you, and he has also proposed one platinum platform. I think some universities have also joined into that. This platinum platform has some relations with the government of Belgium, so we can also work with them. If some of our scholars are interested, they can join his platinum platform, and about everything is shown in the website itself. Sir, we are very thankful to you, and we invite this kind of dialogues, because in other case also I told that ICHR should provide a platform, a scientific platform where different views are expressed and discussed. It should not be one way of political and we welcome them to India and also to stay here and work on their topics. And I request our member secretary, Professor Gopinath, to propose a formal vote of thanks. And I thank all of you for coming over here.
Thank you, Professor Rao. It's my pleasure to propose this vote of thanks both to the Speaker of the day, Professor Balagangadhara, who, not being from the discipline of history, tried to critique it, leading to a lot of debate, and I think it's healthy. We should debate. And as the Chairman just mentioned, the ICHR can be a venue of debate, can offer a space for debate, as long as the debate refers to history. I think that is important. We will debate as long as we are debating history, from whatever, whether it's from within the discipline of history or from outside the discipline. We welcome that, these inputs. And I thank all of you for taking time out to come and listen to us, and the staff of the ICHR who has made all this possible. Dr. Nupur Singh here, she did all the arrangements. And I must thank the other speakers, Professor Ranabir Chakravarti from JNU, who at very short notice, and I'm very sorry for that, he agreed to come and speak on the book launch. And Professor Rajan Gurukkal, who is our council member, he agreed to comment on your paper. He read the whole paper. He was one of the few people who had read two of your major works, so that is why he was asked to comment. And we also, the Chairman this morning, I think, requested two of our other council members to be part of this, Professor Qadri and Professor Adappa Satyanarayana. I thank all of them in making today's 7th Maulana Azad Memorial Lecture an interesting lecture. Thank you.